Faith and Family Fellowship Podcast is a Christ-centered podcast. Established in 2019 and hosted weekly by Pastor Chris Busher. Addressing a host of topics such as the Great Commission, Christian discipleship, and often featuring interviews with special guests who are experts in their field. The views and events expressed on this podcast and all related materials belong solely to their author and not necessarily to the author's employer, organization, committee, or other group or individual. While all attempts are made to present accurate information, some information may become outdated over time. Faith and Family Fellowship Podcast makes every attempt to timely update any and all such information. Without further delay, here's another powerful episode of Faith and Family Fellowship Podcast.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Faith and Family Fellowship. Once again, I'm your host, Dallas Monticue, and here in the studio today, we have another amazing guest, Andy Konigsmark. As I kept listening to him talk today through his testimony and through the things that we were saying, I kept remembering back to this message. And I've shared this a little bit before in a podcast, but it's so good, it relates so perfectly that I have to mention it again. So 1 Samuel 17, we're talking about the story of King David before he fights Goliath. And so what's happening here, I'm not going to read all of it to you, but I'm going to read just a piece. And so what Andy is mentioning today, he'll tell a little bit more about it. But what he's saying is that he was always considered an underdog in his life. In high school, growing up, he wasn't smart enough, he wasn't tall enough, he wasn't good enough, all these things. And I think so many of us can relate. And if we can take this and parallel it to the Bible and someone who felt the same way, who was looked at the same way as an underdog, but he overcame through the glory of God. And so let's look at 1 Samuel 17:32. And David here is going to fight Goliath. And David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father, and when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it from his mouth. And if he arose against me, I caught him by the beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defiled the armies of the living God." And David said, "The Lord delivered me from the paw of the lion, from the paw of the bear, and will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." And I think this is so cool because David was told when the entire army of Israel took a step backward because of Goliath, David took a step forward. And I've mentioned this before in another podcast, but it's so good. It relates so perfect that Andy was told, "You're not good enough. You're not tall enough. You're not strong enough." All these things in his life. And he's going to tell you a little bit more about that as we go on. But in our life, let's look at our own life. Let's mirror this to our life. Are you told that you're not good enough? Are you told that you're not strong enough, not tall enough? You're not educated enough. You're not prepared enough. But because of God, He is preparing you. He's preparing you for the battles that are to come through the battles that you've already faced, the battles you've already fought before. David had to fight Goliath, but God already had sent him a bear and a lion to prepare for this battle. And so I just wanted to give you guys that little word today before we jump into it. Be encouraged today. Be inspired through Andy's message today. And if you are not a part of the family of Faith and Family Fellowship, I encourage you to do so. We have new messages coming every single week, multiple times a week. I'm really excited about what we have coming. Thank you guys so much.
You're listening to the Faith and Family Fellowship Podcast. We'll be right back after this quick word from our sponsors.
A few years ago, a young reader sat down in a coffee shop and began, writing. R.R. Noel's poem took social media by storm. Using a typewriter, Noel writes a poem each day for her readers, supporters, and fellow writers. Since 2016, R.R. Noel's work has been featured in numerous publications, including the HuffPost, BuzzFeed, 5280 magazine, and she's published in 3 full-length poetry collections. To order her newest addition to the collection, At War with Stars, a book through self-discovery and seeking unanswered questions, visit rrnoall.com. Would God register to vote as a Republican or a Democrat? Stephen Connolly is willing to risk millions on the answer. This is a proactive look at how religious voters can cut through the media, spin in the mess in the American politics to identify what the Creator would really think. Readers will learn why it's a myth that God only cares about abortion and homosexuality when in fact he is aligned with one party on economics, foreign policy, race relations, and more. Find your book by searching The God Bet on Amazon today.
Andy, it's so great to have you here today. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. You actually got our last name correct, so that doesn't happen a lot, but I appreciate it.
Yes, good. That's good news. That's a great start to the interview. Andy is a Presbyterian minister who lives in a small city of Angel Fire, New Mexico. Is it a small city? It's a small congregation church, but is it a small city as well?
It is. There's about 1,200 full-time residents. And so it's interesting. It is a ski resort, but we refer to it as like the forgotten ski resort in America.
Wow.
It was established in the 1960s, but most people don't even realize that's what it is. So it is like a year-round resort, but it was started as a ski resort originally.
I love small cities like that.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I grew up in a city of 800 people.
Oh!
It's perfect.
Yeah, I think the big difference between like that is, I don't know about where you grew up, but we have tons and tons of visitors, so it ebbs and flows all the time, so like we have 1,200
Okay,
here.
we didn't have as many exciting things.
Okay, yeah, like I think over Christmas we'll have like 30,000 visitors.
Wow. No, I don't think my city could fit 30,000 visitors. I don't know.
Yeah, you wouldn't think that. I mean, but there's tons of homes around here, and then the other thing people don't realize about New Mexico is there's not a lot of room to expand. A lot of the land is either owned by the reservations, Bureau of Land Management, or it's national forest. So you come here and it seems like there's just tons and tons of land, which there is, but it's not buildable.
No, I did not know that.
I wouldn't have known that either until we moved here.
And Andy, where are you from originally?
I grew up in Georgia. I actually grew up in Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay, well, that's great. Well, I want to hear a little bit of your background. I see your list here that you sent me. It's so incredible. You were on American Gladiators, Ninja Warrior, The $1 Million Mile. You got a great background. I'm so interested. Can you just tell us a little bit more about yourself for us to get to know you a little bit more?
Sure. I grew up always playing sports, but I was always kind of on the small side. And so, I think I was always having to kind of be that scrappy athlete. And, the big part of my story is I was told that I wasn't going to graduate high school. I wasn't going to go to college. As a young kid, I was placed in special ed. And, the school system really wanted me to pursue a trade instead of going into, like college studies. And, my family was like, there's nothing wrong with him. He just has learning disabilities. And so thankfully, my mother really was an advocate for me and really fought for me to get the best help I could get from the school system. And I think a lot of my motivation has been fueled by people telling me that I wasn't going to be able to do things. So, you're not going to be able to play sports. You're not going to be able to go to college. You're not going to do comedy. You're not going to be a minister. You're never going to leave Georgia. So I think so much of that, of my story of being told I wasn't going to do things, really fueled me to do things instead of kind of accepting that as status quo.
Yeah. Yeah, I think nowadays we kind of go to the other option, like you say, we kind of pull back a little bit and we start to believe those things that people say about us instead of use it for motivation to be who you are today. Would you agree with that?
Right. Oh, totally. And, it's frustrating that, that we can pull people away from things they might achieve by just our words, but the words are so powerful and can be, we can use them to lift people up, or we can use obviously to tear people down. And so thankfully for me, I used them as a motivator.
Yeah. And we're here today to talk about your book, Born to Backslide. And I'm sure you'll get a little bit more into that as we go on. But I also see here that you're a passionate snowboarder, a mountain biker, adventure racer. And also, I do want to hear about this Ninja Warrior Gladiator thing. What got you into this type of stuff?
Well, the crazy thing is when we lived in LA, when I was going to seminary, I was doing stand-up comedy and performing, 2 to 3 times a week around the LA area. And at that time, Last Comic Standing was becoming a big deal on television, and it was an NBC show. And so my sister really wanted me to audition for Last Comic Standing. So I told her I would, and I realized that I'd missed the audition by like a day or something. But there was going to be an audition, I think the next day, for American Gladiators. And as a child, I'd always watched it growing up and loved it. And I was like, you know what? I'm in shape. I'm here. I've got the time to go down to audition tomorrow. I'll go do it. And I drove down to Venice Beach, and it was crazy. When we got down there, I thought, I bet you there'll be 100 people down there auditioning. And I think at that audition, there was maybe 3,000 people.
Wow.
that showed up. And I got there, I want to say the audition time was at 8. And I probably got there at 7:30. I knew I needed to get there a little early. And I probably was near the back of the line. And so we get there around 7:30, and I don't think I even got to go before the casting team until probably 3 p.m. And it was ridiculous. They were like, okay, do as many pull-ups as you can, do as many push-ups as you can, run to that cone, run back. And then at the end of that, they're like, okay, tell us your name and what you do for a living. And so I tell them that I'm studying to be a minister, and they're like, okay, great, thanks. And that was it. I mean, after standing in line for, whatever that was, 8 hours, basically, I had maybe a minute-long audition, and probably a month later, they called back and said, hey, we're interested in you doing the second round of interviews for the show. So I did that, and then again, don't hear back from them. And probably another month later, they invited, I want to say, maybe 40 of us on set. And so we practiced and trained for the show for maybe a week. And then from that, I think they selected 24 of us and then 4 alternates. And originally I was not selected on the show. I was an alternate. And so on the first night of filming, one of the competitors tore his ACL, and I was actually out snowboarding, and they called me and they were like, hey, if you want to be on the show, you need to be here at 8 a.m. in the morning. And I was like, oh gosh. I was like, okay, well, I'm out in the mountains snowboarding. I was like, I think I can make it. And so I get down there, and within 30 minutes of being on set, I'm going for my first event. So I got to compete, and I made it through a couple episodes and then lost in the semifinals. And that's in the book. And it was just, obviously it was heartbreaking because I was leading the whole time and then lost kind of right at the end. And so, a lot of people over the years man, I can't believe you lost. It's like, well, I did, So that's how I got to do American Gladiators. And then Ninja Warrior, they were filming and doing one of the regional qualifiers in Denver, and we'd moved to Colorado at that point. And I guess they have maybe scouts that work for them, and they know kind of where people are. And so they reached out to me and said, hey, we're going to be shooting a regional qualifier. Basically anybody can compete, but they have these, it's these walk-on events. And so to get there, to get a walk-on spot, people get there. It's crazy. Some people get there a week in advance, camp out and wait and hope that they take enough walk-ons. And it just depends. So in any given regional, they might take 100 walk-ons, they might take 5. But then they have people that are selected to compete, which I was. So I didn't have to do the walk-on. And I only made it through 5 obstacles. The thing that most people don't realize about with Ninja Warrior is that the people that do really well on it, that's their thing. That's where they spend all their time and energy is
in courses like that.
Oh my gosh, it's nuts. And that's their life, And we were living in another small town, and I didn't have access to it. It's I'm just working out just, like an average Joe. And I mean, these guys that do really well and the women that do really well, I mean, that is their life. And so the next year I was invited to come back and compete again. And I was just like, man, this is not something I have time and energy to be training for.
I really like your story of American Gladiators because it's going to try out for American Idol and then trying out for Fear Factor instead. That's the crazy story. That's amazing. I don't have stories like that.
Yeah, it was just, it's one of those things. My wife is a health and wellness coach, and we kind of talk about it. It's this idea of one of the reasons you stay in shape is to always be ready because you don't know what opportunities are going to come. And so I think about it over the years. I've gotten to go on some pretty cool trips and gotten to do some cool races. And I've gotten to do, obviously I got to do American Gladiators and Ninja Warrior. And then I got to do $1 Million Mile. And part of it is just because, like I said, it was this whole premise is I was ready, and I kind of stayed ready. And my wife's like, well, Andy, not everybody's going to get to compete on a TV show. And I'm like, I get that. But I was like, I would hate to get invited on like a trip to go hike like Mount Kilimanjaro. And it was like a once in a lifetime opportunity, and to say no because I wasn't in shape to do it, or, a great mountain bike trip or whatever it is. And so I don't know. That's just probably been part of my story of like always trying to be ready.
I think we can definitely apply that to our own lives as well, to be ready for whatever comes, because we don't know what's going to come. We didn't expect 2020 coronavirus to come.
No.
We never know what's going to happen.
No. And what's it like down there with the virus? We're back in lockdown.
I think we passed Italy for the highest coronavirus cases. So, I think we're doing pretty bad.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's nuts. And I don't know like what the temperature is there based on how people feel about it, but it's just so divisive.
Actually, I think a lot of Brazilians are kind of just like, just another day.
Oh, really? Good. That might be the better
answer. Of course, not everyone, but a lot of people are like, meh.
No, I know what you're saying, though. So that's a lot of my life. And then I got to compete in $1 Million Mile in 2018. I think we filmed it in 2018, and then it showed in 2019. And the crazy thing about that is, so we didn't get to practice on any of the obstacles. It was like we got to see them, but the guys that we were running against in the show were all professional obstacle course racers. And they had been training on this stuff for several weeks, maybe even a month before filming took place. And, unfortunately, I think it was a really cool concept, but, I just don't think they ran through with like enough guinea pigs to really know how the show is going to turn out, because I think there wasn't like enough excitement behind it. And it wasn't, I don't know, it was very much set up that the professional racers were going to win, but you want the underdog to win, which, like I was 40 years old when we filmed it, and the guy that I was running against was like 21 or 22. And I want to say he was like the youngest American to win like a Spartan race or something.
Just like outrageous people, that you're racing against.
Oh my gosh. Totally. Like he consistently, I think this is right, ran like a 5-minute mile. And they're like, well, how fast do you run a mile? And I'm like, consistently I run like a 7-minute mile, which, it's pretty good, but it's not like it's fast. So if you give me a 2-minute head start and this guy runs a 5-minute mile, if you do the math, he's already gaining, he's gaining on me. It's interesting. I called my wife the night before we went out to film, and she said, what do you think? And I said, I'm coming home with money. It's just a matter of how much. And she said, how do you know? And I said, because I've seen the course, I understand the rules. And I said, I'm either coming home with 10,000 or 25. And she said, well, why don't you think you're going to win more? And I said, I can assure you, if I try to go for 50 or 100, that I'm going to come home with nothing. Because the way the game worked was once you hit a checkpoint, you had to leave the game. Basically, like once you grabbed the money, you didn't bank it. You were basically like running and trying to get away with the money. Whereas in, like some game shows, you like kind of bank it and can't lose it. So for me, when I got to the 10,000 threshold, I was like, this guy's gaining on me, and I exited the game. So, but nobody won the $1 million prize. And then that was the end of they didn't bring it back after that year, which is kind of crazy because LeBron James was the executive producer. And I want to say it was his first TV show that he produced. And they put a lot of money into into it for it not to do well. But, our family got money, which was great. Put it in the kids' college fund.
That's a good deal. Well, thank you for explaining a little bit about your life. I was very curious when I read this. Not everybody I get to talk to has an amazing background like this. So, thank you for that.
Well, thank you.
And I do want to
no worries.
get into the book a little bit more, Born to Backslide. And so first off,
Sure.
what created the title of this? What inspired you to write this book?
So I was raised in a somewhat conservative Christian family, and I think it was like a phrase that I would hear being thrown around in our church culture, and I was like, oh, he's backsliding, or she's backsliding. And it kind of meant that the person had walked away from their faith, and it was never used in a good term. You know, if somebody was backsliding, it meant they were up to no good. And so I think part of it is I feel like I struggled so much from kind of elementary school till I graduated high school. And I felt like, you know, here I am trying to figure out my faith in the midst of these struggles and feeling like I'm always kind of getting pushed back and not given the space or the freedom to explore my Christian faith. And through that, I'd never felt like I was really moving forward. And so much of the book is this idea that, you know, it's a struggle. All of it is. Life is, our faith is, you know, raising kids, marriage. And, you know, we have the opportunity to embrace that struggle and to push through, or we can kind of basically backslide and let it beat us. So it's like, what are we going to do? Are we going to push forward? Or are we going to kind of let our circumstances dictate our future?
I think it's a great parallel to your American Gladiator, Ninja Warrior, $1 Million Mile, all of that. You were the underdog in all of these situations compared to the professionals.
Oh, for sure.
Competing all the time for this.
For sure. And I think so much of like my story, like I said, you know, being told I wasn't going to graduate high school and not going to go to college. And I think so much of my story of being told that I wasn't going to do something. So instead of basically backsliding, I tried to push forward as much as I could. And then, you know, through that, my faith has evolved and formed. And, you know, a lot of the book is kind of me figuring out my place as a minister as I've kind of struggled through life, and, you know, how I'm going to respond to people around me as well.
Mm-hmm. And who would you say that this book is written for? Would it be someone who experienced a similar life to you? Anybody can just pick up this book and be inspired by it? What do you think about that?
A lot of it is for people that are disenchanted maybe with their church experience. So for them to say, okay, maybe I'm not ready to go back to church, but I'm not done with my faith yet. And so I think a lot of that is kind of geared toward, I would say, probably age 28 to probably 40. But I have found that, you know, older adults who've read it as well, they've said they've enjoyed it. But, you know, there is some disconnect for them on some things that I talk about. And, you know, I also talk about how much experience we can have these beliefs until we have a real life experience. And so like one in there, I talk about a guy that I used to work with who was brought to the U.S. when he was 7 illegally. Well, he's here illegally. Mm-hmm. He's here legal now, but, you know, people were like, well, he doesn't deserve to be here. You know, he came here illegally, send him home. And it's like, well, he didn't choose to come.
Yeah.
You know, his family brought him here. And then when there was like threats of being sent back to Mexico, it's like, well, he needed to send him home. It's like, well, he left this place when he was 7 years old. Like, that's not his home anymore. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, I think it's real easy to have these opinions about something like immigration. And that's part of my story in there, is just, you know, a lot of these ideas that I grew up with in the church or things that I heard, you know, growing up in Georgia. I didn't have a personal connection or interaction with them.
Mm-hmm. I don't know what it is, but Mexico has a bad rap in the U.S. Like, for example, like I said before, my wife is Brazilian, and I was just trying to explain to her why Mexico has a bad rap for America. Would it be the same situation if it was someone from Germany?
Yeah, and I don't know.
You know, would they still feel the same way? I don't know.
Well, I'm guessing, like, I don't know if there's people that come into Brazil illegally for a better life, you know, but it's that idea that I think people feel like people from Mexico are coming into America and like stealing our culture and taking jobs away. And I don't know if I believe that to be true, but you never hear people bad-mouthing Canadians.
Yeah, right.
You know, for that reason. Mm-hmm. But maybe there's not an issue with Canadians coming across the border. I don't know. I've never read that.
And Andy, what would you say is your favorite part of this book? Just an overall story or just one thing that sticks out the most to you?
I think the favorite part of my book is the fact that I'm blending my passion for humor, for sports, and for theology, but it's not too heavy in any one area where somebody's going to have to sit down with a dictionary to understand what I'm talking about. I think it's written very simply, and it's a funny story, and it's an easy read, and I think it's enjoyable. And then I think, there's nuggets of wisdom in there for everybody, including myself.
And what do you think overall, what was your overall message today for our listeners, for your readers? What's something that you just want to bring with your life, one overall sentence or word? This is it.
I think you have to write your own story. Don't let somebody write it for you.
I think we can definitely look at that with your testimony that you shared with us and everything you've been talking about today. That's the overall theme.
Yeah, and I think, anytime you see a closed door, I know it's that cliche, but, look for the open one. And, if you're choosing adventure, then chase after adventure. We've chosen to live in a ski resort town so that I can snowboard and mountain bike, and I don't always have to be wanting to do it. Our family made that decision. And so for me, that was the story we wrote, to serve in a ski town.
Great. And I have one more question for you to end the podcast today.
Yeah, absolutely.
What is the future of 2021 for you and your family?
Sure. I hope it's for most of us, and it's basically going back to somewhat of a normal life, and for our kids to be able to be back in school in person, and, for us to be enjoying living in community, whereas I feel like we've been so closed off from personal relationships. I hope that we have that opportunity to live in community with people around us.
We need that community too. We need that human interaction, face to face.
Oh yeah. Ready Player 2 just came out, and it's the follow up to Ready Player 1. And there's a line in there where they just said, basically we weren't meant to live in social media, that we were designed to live in tribes of like 100 people with interactions that were face to face. And it's so true that, we're just designed and wired from birth to be in personal connection with one another.
I think I've heard about Ready Player 1 and I really liked it. I think Ready Player 2 would be awesome if I'm remembering correctly.
It's good. It's interesting. Yeah. So Ready Player 1, they made it into a film.
That's what I watched, the film, definitely.
Okay. And it was good. And I think they've written it more. That was written more to like middle school, high school, early 20s. The interesting thing is I don't feel like Ready Player 2 is like that. I think it's like a little bit more raw and a little bit more abrasive. Well,
Andy, thank you so much for being a part of the show today. And if I can have you in the podcast with a prayer, I would really appreciate it.
Sure. Got a promise. As we embrace your arrival, much of our world feels clouded in darkness. And I know that when we pull away from your Holy Spirit, the divine light can grow dim. And I pray that we allow our spirits to become open to your blessings and your direction. And I pray in these uncertain times that you lead us into a deeper and more meaningful life with you. In your holy name, amen.
Amen.
You've just listened to the Faith and Family Fellowship Podcast with your host, Pastor Chris Busher. Faith and Family Fellowship Podcast was recorded live in studio with final editing made before uploading. Subscribe today to Faith and Family Fellowship Podcast on iTunes or Google Play. For more fantastic daily content, visit Pastor Chris Busher online via Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Don't miss the next episode on Faith and Family Fellowship Podcast.